I'm good.
Okay.
I'm ready to jump in.
No, fair enough. Just a quick word about the founding of the church in Laodicea. We get one tiny glimpse. I'll just do this really quickly here. And again, you can look at the screen for the sake of time. In 1 Corinthians 16, Paul says, "But I will stay in Ephesus until Pentecost, for a wide door for effective work has opened to me, and there are many adversaries." So you remember, this is Paul's third missionary journey. He spends 2 years camped out in Ephesus. Acts 19 tells us about this. Remember this? I mentioned this, I think, on our first week maybe, but here's what it says. In Ephesus, Paul took the disciples with him, reasoning daily in the hall of Tyrannus. This continued for 2 years, so that all, now the orange part is important, so that all the residents of Asia heard the word of the Lord, both Jews and Greeks. So when you see all the residents of Asia, that's that whole middle part of the picture there, including the churches in Revelation. So there's very strong reason to believe that most of the churches in Revelation, and even some of the other ones, were probably founded or planted while Paul was in his 2-year ministry right there in Ephesus. Okay, so that's very likely. And just to get a sampling of what that looked like in one instance here, you can see here on the screen, in fact, I'll stand up again here for this. Paul was camped out in Ephesus, and 120 miles up the river, you have 3 cities. You have Laodicea, you have Colossae, and you have Hierapolis. So obviously this is our city for this evening, but these 3 were right near each other, and Paul never visits these churches, at least not in the New Testament. He may go there afterwards, but he's not there earlier on. He's here for 2 years, but what we find out is this. In the book of Colossians, there's a guy named Epaphras. You remember Epaphras? It says, "You have heard before in the word of truth the gospel, which has come to you, just as you learned it from Epaphras, our beloved servant." Now, do you see what church this is? This is the Colossian church. Paul did not plant that church. Epaphras did, and this was a man who was influenced by Paul. Now, look at Colossians 2:1. "For I want you to know how great a struggle I have for you," the Colossians, "and for those in Laodicea, and for all who have not seen me face to face." So Paul hasn't been there before, but look at this in Colossians 4. I love this text. "Epaphras, who is one of you," so where is Epaphras originally from? He's a Colossian, right? "Epaphras, who is one of you, a servant of Christ Jesus, greets you, always struggling on your behalf in his prayers, that you may stand mature and fully assured in all the will of God. For I bear him witness," this is Epaphras, "that he has worked hard for you," the Colossians. We think he planted that church. I mean, he did. That's what Paul said in the first chapter. He's the one that brought the gospel to them. So he's worked hard for you, Colossians, and look, "and for those in Laodicea and in Hierapolis." And Doug Moo, who's a great New Testament commentator, he argues Epaphras was probably the founder of churches in all 3 cities. And this verse makes it clear that he continued to exercise pastoral oversight over those cities. So when you zoom back out here, Paul was here for 2 years, and Epaphras probably came from his hometown of Colossae up here for maybe work or trade. He saw Paul preaching in the hall of Tyrannus, was apparently converted there, and he went back up the river valley, and he apparently planted churches in all 3 cities. So where did the church at Laodicea come from? It probably came through, Paul sort of was the grandfather of the church. Paul was the spiritual father of Epaphras, who then Epaphras probably planted all 3 churches in these 3 cities, and Laodicea is the city that we're looking at for tonight. So that's just a little background information on where the church in Laodicea probably originated from, about 30 to 40 years before the book of Revelation was written.